Hello everyone, today I'm going to talk about how I was able to learn French for really cheap. And on top of it, I skipped 3 years of college French. And I'm going to sit the DLF B2 exam this December. And having spoken to a tutor on Italki, which is like a Skype call where you call a tutor and they talk to you for a little bit. I haven't used a tutor in a long time, but I did Skype call a tutor. And during that lesson, my tutor told me, you're basically fluent. You don't master the language. You're not able to speak without making mistakes ever, but it's very hard to correct you because you speak pretty well, and I don't think you're going to have any problem with the test. So this has been a great accomplishment for me, and I just want to talk about how, well, at the end of the day, I'm not particularly talented in language learning. I'm just really passionate about it, and I learned a lot about how to learn languages. And so, because French is one of the most desired languages to speak as a second language in the world, it's the only other operating language of the United Nations. There are 6 official languages, but French and English are the privileged languages of the United Nations. It's really cool to learn French. It's really a powerful language still to this day. It's a language of prestige and politics and diplomacy. It's a language of diplomacy and spoken in many nations in the world. And it's a stepping stone for you to be able to learn other languages as you go forward in your language learning journey, because actually French is not so different from English. Just speaking English, you know about 60% of French words. But let's start from the ground up on how I actually learned French from day one, what I did to get to this point, and how I can save you a lot of time. Because although I skipped 3 years of college French, it took me about 4 years to get to this level. The advantage, however, was I didn't pay all that tuition. I think if you don't include the trips I went to Paris and Montreal, which were like enrichment trips, but if you just take into account all of the books I've bought and you take into account everything that I've done to get to the level of French I have, I can't say I've even spent $1,000 on French. I probably haven't even spent $500 in learning the language. So I think that's a great accomplishment. So to start off, the first book I used was Assimil. Assimil is a French language learning book series, and for that reason it's probably one of the better ones to learn, but you don't actually have to use an Assimil book. You can use a book like Teach Yourself, Colloquial, French. Just get a beginner book to teach you the rudimentary elements of the language, because this is probably the hardest part. The hardest part is the beginning, where you just have to memorize the pronouns, you have to memorize basic aspects of the language, and the first 3 months is the slowest part and the hardest part to learning language. So start slow, make sure you work consistently every day. That's sort of the groundwork here. You have to work consistently every day, a little bit of French, 20 to 30 minutes, and build up to the point where you can actually understand the rudimentary basics and nuts and bolts of the language. But we're going to get into a little bit of theory here about languages when we talk about getting your first book and learning a language. It doesn't really matter what beginner book you got, as I say, but I think that it's really important to understand that what's going to drive you to actually becoming fluent in French is consistency, and actually something they don't do in school. I don't recommend doing exercises. I don't recommend using flashcards to memorize vocabulary. That's great to pass a test in school. But if you actually want to become fluent in French, be able to express yourself in French, learn things in context. Learn things from reading dialogues in the beginning, and then later on reading articles, short articles on blogs and newspapers. Eventually get into where you can talk to people, but memorization is often what people think of when they think about education in general, which is pretty sad, but also language learning. And it's not a lot of memorization. It's not route memorization at the very least. You're not sitting there and just cramming a whole bunch of words into your head. I mean, for certain languages, perhaps Chinese characters and kanji in Japanese, this is necessary. But for French vocabulary, do not memorize. Do not memorize. If I could drill something into you guys right now, is don't memorize the words that you're going to learn that are brand new. Go ahead and learn words from context, from within a dialogue or within actual content that you're consuming. Now I want this tutorial to be as cheap as possible. I want it to be as accessible as possible for everyone who wants to learn the language, because I don't think you have to spend a lot of money to learn French well. It's such a widespread language, and it's a language with so much content on the internet already that you can pick it up without spending a whole bunch of money. So, having said that, I'm not going to include websites that I've paid for like Link or italki or anything like that, because I don't think they're particularly... They are useful, but I don't think they're particularly necessary to learn the language. I do recommend them wholeheartedly, but I don't think you need to subscribe to Link to have their library, or you need to use italki in particular to learn French. I think what's important is you know the principles of a linguist named Stephen Krashen, who basically boils down language acquisition to understanding meaningful content. You should choose content that's interesting to you once you get to the intermediate stage. Let's say you're really into fashion, let's say you're really into sports, you want to watch soccer in French, let's say you really want to learn about guitar in French, and music. You're gonna look for those resources, and you're gonna look at those different sources of content on the internet, and you're going to use that to actually consolidate languages. You're going to use it to actually learn French, and you're going to use that to progress slowly but surely. Two great podcasts which are great for once you reach an intermediate level are Inner French and Français Authentique. I'm going to put the links for all the resources that I mentioned in the description box for this video. But basically these two podcasts are entirely free, and they allow you to but you can read the transcripts of the podcast as well. But they give you access to content which is spoken in clear standard French and is not too difficult at first. Because if you go to Netflix, I just turned on a Netflix French special, like TV show, yesterday night, and there was so much slang that it was just like, wow, this is a different register of French entirely. But to pass exams in French and to be able to use French professionally, you're going to need to know standard French, and that's what they speak in these two podcasts. So basically, once you get to intermediate level, put on Français Authentique or Inner French and read the transcript and look up the new words and learn things from context like that. But you're going to want to always learn things in context. Now, if you live in a major city, meetup.com is going to be a great website to use as well, besides italki or paid tutor services, because there are plenty of French meetups. Like, I'm here in New York City, and I could count 7 good French meetup groups where people come together to speak the language, and it's completely free of charge, and you get to practice and people correct you. And I think that's really what the difference is between someone who sort of learns French in school and does poorly at it and is discouraged by traditional education, and someone who's actually able to speak French because they're passionate about the language. So the single most important activity I can say has boosted my French skills and my skills in any language that I'm literate in is actually reading. Here I have a book that I'm reading right now. It's by Paul Rousseau. It's called Le Fur sur la Peau, and it's a book set in Montreal about sort of like the different political and ethnic struggles they had between like the Irish and the English, and it's really cool. And what's really important is that you learn to read in a language. I mean, learning to read is something incredibly important for your ability to progress in a language. And yeah, your ability to speak the standard language is what's going to really open the most doors and opportunities. Yes, slang is really cool, and it's cool to relate to people on that level, but you're going to really want to speak the standard version of French to gain employment, or perhaps study in a French university. So that's the most important thing. So I think I'm going to create a video about how I'm studying for the DALF B2 exam, but I just wanted to wrap this video up and basically say what are the best things to learn French for cheap. In that vein of keeping things cheap, I do want to say link.com is only about, I think, $13 a month for membership. And I think it's an excellent resource. I think that you're actually able to gain access to a huge library with the reader tool, which like highlights words for you and lets you keep the definitions, make flashcards. I don't really like flashcards, but it's a great way to do it. So if there's one like online app or online resource I can recommend is Link. It's a library. It's wonderful, and I did use it quite a bit to develop my French. I don't recommend Duolingo just because I think I've never used it very much, and I think that it just has this funny quality of like giving you the most random sentences, like the dinosaur went to the zoo or something. Like you don't have to know any of that, and it's also completely out of context, these random sentences. So I don't like Duolingo at all. But yeah, and other courses tend to be super expensive. So I think link.com, $13 a month is pretty great. I think when you get to intermediate level, if you want to, absolutely pay for italki tutoring. That'll really help your conversation skills. At some point, I do think formal education can be useful because when it comes to actually writing and expressing yourself in the written form of the language and being educated and being able to produce a good email or actually have the credentials to get a job in a French-speaking nation or a French-speaking company, you're willing to level formal education. But basically, you can skip the first 2 years, the first 3 years of college French by yourself studying at home. Like, I think it's really cool. I mean, I've done it. That's what I think is really wonderful about it. I mean, you know, I think it's a failure of the education system that it's so hard to like teach kids foreign languages. Like I took 7 years of Spanish, like 3 years in middle school and like 4 years in high school, and it wasn't until I started learning it at home, like on my own and with the internet, that I was actually able to speak Spanish fluently as well. So I really think it's important to go ahead and take the initiative and take your education in your own hands and learn things on your own. So thank you very much for watching. I'm going to put all of the resources. I'm kind of scatterbrained as a general individual, but I'm going to put all of the resources for this video in the description box, all the resources that I've mentioned, and I'm going to write a blog post because I'm a much better writer than I am a speaker, to a camera at least, and I'm going to make like a detailed overview of how I learned French. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far or you watched it at all, bye bye.